Now, this has been a very big week for football, for European football in particular. Manchester City played Real Madrid in the second leg of the semi-final of the Champions League. The first leg was drawn in Madrid, and on Wednesday night last, Manchester City hammered Real Madrid. It was a comprehensive humiliation, you could say, of a great club with a great record in the Champions League. They've won it 14 times and have been in 11 of the last 13 semi-finals. They have a very fine team. They went to Anfield earlier in the competition, went 2-0 down, as they did on Wednesday, but came back to beat Liverpool 5-2 at Anfield. There was no comeback on Wednesday. It was comprehensive, and one felt that this was the end of an era for Real Madrid, and indeed earlier this season Manchester United beat Barcelona in the Europa League. So what's happening in Spanish football, and what was the reaction to Wednesday night's, well, humiliation really? We're joined now by Richard Fitzpatrick. Richard is a very good journalist. He's a freelance journalist. He lives and works from Barcelona and has done for many years. Richard, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate it. What was the reaction in Spain, particularly in Madrid, but also in Barcelona, where I'm sure they enjoyed it, to this very comprehensive 4-0 defeat?
Yeah. In Barcelona, they were claiming the victory as theirs because it's a Barca-flavoured Manchester City project with Pep Guardiola, most obviously as coach. And, you know, the CEO is the ex-director of Barca, Soriano, and Chiqui Begiristain, the sporting director, is Barca. But more importantly, Madrid, total shock, huge humiliation. El Chiringuito, the late-night TV show, opened their programme on Wednesday night with a 3-minute reel of Guti, a famous ex-Real Madrid player, just watching the game in horror. It was played to the background of kind of hammer horror music, or it was just like a horror show. There hasn't been a defeat like this in knockout European football for Real Madrid. Only one comes to mind in '89. They lost 5-0 to the great Milan team of Rijkaard and Van Basten and Gullit. After that game, Silvio Berlusconi went into the Real Madrid dressing room and he got the players to hold hands while he gave them a desolation speech.
Yes.
But this was it's frightening for Real Madrid because they recognise how powerful Man City have become. They've been hammering on about this, particularly their president Florentino Perez, for the last few years, about these state-run clubs. Like players are in the crosshairs. That great generation of players: Toni Kroos, Luka Modric, Karim Benzema. They're all in their mid-30s.
Yes, I mean, age was a big issue in my view because the midfield of Real Madrid, in both legs, incidentally, Luka Modric, who's a magnificent player, he's 37 now. Yeah. Toni Kroos, he's 33, going on 34. And Karim Benzema, another great player, is 35, centre forward. And age certainly was a factor, but it didn't really explain how comprehensive. Over the two games, Manchester City outplayed Real Madrid. And, of course, City are younger and may well get better and become more dominant. The question, I suppose, is, and this is a big question for Spanish football as well, there is a shadow to some extent over the Manchester City progress under Pep Guardiola because they're facing 115 charges of improper corporate conduct. Now, they've broken the football's fair play rules, it is alleged, but nothing has happened and no one expects anything to happen, frankly. There is also, isn't there, Richard, a big shadow, and it's very real, over Barcelona Football Club.
Yeah, exactly. We come to Barcelona in a second. Like, if you look at the situation there between Real Madrid and Man City, it's stark. The spending, like, it doesn't take a genius to figure out what has happened, Real Madrid team stocked with old dwindling stars. They looked to the bench in the second half. The only player they could bring on to try and change the game was Marco Asensio, who's been at the club for 7 years and has yet to become a starter on that team. Whereas Man City have Phil Foden, Mahrez, Julian Alvarez, a number 9 starter for Argentina when they won the World Cup in December. Real Madrid over the last 10 years have been 25th in net spending of the big clubs in Europe. They've been doing this stadium rebuild, so they don't have money to spend. They haven't gone out and spent really since net spend since 2019. So it was kind of impossible for them to compete. They were going to be found out. It was a miracle they won the Champions League with that aging team last season.
Yes.
Like Manchester City are in the dock for those financial fair play regulation breaches, 115 of them. So the cards are stacked against a club like Real Madrid. They've been very prudent in their spending. They've sold well over the last 3 or 4 years, and they've bought in young players. They are replenishing that squad. Tchouaméni, Camavinga, Fede Valverde, Vinicius, Rodrigo. They have the spine of a good team. They will remain competitive, but it's nothing. They don't have the squad depth that Real Madrid have. Now, if you look across the country in Spain at Barca, like they're in a far worse state financially.
How do we explain the fact that Barcelona have won La Liga by, at the moment, 14 points, I think?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, they wrapped up the league title on Sunday with 4 games to play. 14 points ahead of Real Madrid. Historically, this has been the case with Real Madrid for the last 20 years. They've been very lax in La Liga. They've won the La Liga in 2022, 2020, 2017, go back to 2012, and then 2008. So Barca have been dominant in a couple of titles for Atletico over those 15 years. But Real Madrid have prioritised the Champions League trophy over those years. So Carlo Ancelotti is in the line of fire now because he hasn't been able to keep that squad competitive in the league this season. He's on borrowed time, obviously, at the club now. But it's just a philosophical thing with Real Madrid that they prioritise the Champions League.
Now, Barcelona are, it seems, in very serious trouble despite the fact that they have won La Liga and they've won it very comfortably. I saw them play Manchester United in the Europa League and Manchester United beat them and deserved to beat them, really, which is a shock because Manchester United aren't really what we would expect Manchester United teams to be. Barcelona, they have a match-fixing scandal, which is extraordinary. It also looks like they're bankrupt, virtually. Explain to us, despite, and we should say that Xavi, formerly captain of the great team that Pep Guardiola managed, or coached, rather, with Messi and Iniesta. Xavi is now their coach. He appears to have done his job with what he's got, but the scandals are staggering. The Negreira case, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, El Caso Negreira, it's an incredible scandal. So it blew up in February. This guy, Enrique Negreira, was an ex-referee in the 80s and 90s, and then he became vice president of the Referees Association here in Spain until 2018. So the La Hacienda, the body here in Spain, they started an investigation into corruption into his companies a year ago, and they discovered all these payments that were going from Barca to Negreira from 2001 to 2018, 7.3 million in total payments. This guy is like a key figure in the Referees Association. Why was he getting all this money from Barca? It emerged in his verbal testimony to the investigators that he was giving these verbal reports to the club about referees in La Liga. He didn't have invoices for those reports he was giving. They did further digging. Like there's amazing stuff about this man's finances. He withdrew 550,000 over a 3-year period recently in cash withdrawals, which even just physically to do that, withdraw that amount of money is a huge task. Where did all that money go? So
what service did he render Barcelona is the question.
Yeah, so Barca kept quiet for 2 months. They came out then finally about a month ago to defend themselves. Joan Laporta, the president, came out all guns blazing. He's an extraordinary character, this guy. He operates on a tightrope. He made a rigorous defense of the club. He played to the gallery, all this victim complex, maintaining that there was an array of enemies lined up behind the conspiracy against Barca. He claimed that all the services were primarily done through his son. So he produced video reports that Negreira's son had provided for the club. This guy, Negreira, used to play in the youth academy at Barca. He's in his late 40s. They produced CDs. They had, I think, about 600 kind of printed reports from him over a period from 2013, I think it was, to 2018. Laporta, the president, said they didn't have any other documentary evidence before that because there's a policy at the club to destroy files after 5 years. But it still reeks. There's so many unanswered questions. Why did they make a millionaire out of this guy who had a clear conflict of interest?
Yeah. The question of a Super League is still very much on the agenda. They lost the Super Leaguers, and 6 of the British clubs are involved, the English clubs. They lost, as I understand it, I'm sure you'll correct me, Richard, they lost the case they took to Europe, but they have appealed now to the higher European court, and that appeal is pending. But all of this scrabbling around for money, it seems partly to be to keep up with the Premier League, where all the top players, many of the top coaches want to be because the money is so big and the players are so keen to earn it.
Absolutely.
Is that the case?
Yeah, it is. And now that European Super League project got a body blow with this scrap that's going on in Spain with Barca
Yes.
Aligned against La Liga, UEFA, FIFA, and most critically for the European Super League conspirators, they're fighting against Real Madrid. They've broken off institutional relations with the club. There was a non-aggression pact for years between the two clubs. Florentino Perez, the Real Madrid president, and Joan Laporta were co-conspirators in the European Super League. When the Negreira case broke in February, it's noticeable that Real Madrid took a step back. All the other La Liga clubs signed a document denouncing the alleged corruption. Real Madrid refused to sign that document, but the president, Florentino Perez, was forced about 4 or 6 weeks later to come out and support the investigation into Barca's alleged corruption. And this came from pressure from the members of the Real Madrid club. He put Real Madrid forward as an aggrieved party in the investigation. They can put forward evidence if there was referees who were bribed. They can help the investigation with evidence. So Real Madrid and Barca played the Clásico in La Liga at the end of March. Florentino Perez didn't go to that game. First time he didn't in many, many years. So that has caused a problem for the European Super League project. Joan Laporta also has launched a charm offensive with UEFA, who are they're in loggerheads over this European Super League. He's now pallying up to Ceferin, the chief of the UEFA, trying to appease him, so he doesn't get hit, or Barca doesn't get a hit with the ban from the Champions League next season.
Yeah.
So it's all politics now. Similarly, Joan Laporta has been at war with La Liga. He's trying to appease Javier Tebas, the president of La Liga, as well, in the same manner as he's done with Ceferin at UEFA.
Is it the case that Barcelona, which is a revered name in football, contemporary soccer, they're broke, aren't they?
Yeah, like 1.3 billion debt. It's one of the highest debts that any club in Europe is carrying.
And they're trying to give away players who don't want to leave because they're on good contracts. Is that right?
Yeah, they're still working through a lot of those. Like Jordi Alba is the big case at the moment. He's a year to run in his contract. He's owed about 28 million. His salary actually increases next season.
De Jong is another expensive player they bought from the Netherlands. What's his situation?
Yeah, his fortunes have changed in the last 12 months because he has been really good this season for Barca. Xavi changed to 4-man midfield. It really suited him. He had Busquets in the holding role, and it gave him more freedom. He found his a home finally after 3 seasons where he was unsatisfactory at the club. But last summer they tried to push him out of the club because he was the only saleable asset in the squad. They could have got 80 or 90 million from Manchester United. Were front of the line trying to buy him. They even claimed that his contract was illegal. They were trying to bring a criminal case against him. It's farcical, but De Jong stood his ground, and he said, he's happy in the city. He wants to prove himself at the club. So there's no player in Barca really who's not for sale this summer because they need to sell a couple of players. They want to bring in new players, keep replenishing the squad. But I'd say he'll likely stay again this summer.
When we look at this situation in Spain, and then we look at the situation in Italy, I mean, Manchester City will play Inter Milan in the final of the Champions League. Manchester City will be favourites, but a one-off 90-minute match, you can never be sure of an outcome or the outcome. The question of the gap between Italian and Spanish clubs and the money they have to spend. Dzeko is playing for Inter Milan. Dzeko played for Manchester City about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And he wasn't great then. Lukaku is playing also for Inter. He's on the bench, actually, but they can't be seriously competing with... If Barcelona broke, Inter and AC don't have the means. Roma don't have the means. They're buying, squad players from England. The future of football in Europe doesn't look great, does it? In terms of... Well, it's lopsided. The Premier League can more or less get any coach or player they want. And the Spanish and the Italians are really struggling to survive.
Absolutely, yeah. You said it. Italy's an elephant's graveyard. Mkhitaryan as well. He's 34 in that Inter Milan starting 11. Like Barca, if you look at them, they're buying. They're one of their big punts this summer is they're trying to get Gundogan from Man City, but that's because Man City are only offering him a 1-year contract. He's 32.
Yeah.
They got Lewandowski. They made a big play about that last summer. But he was 30. He just turned 34 last summer. They gave him a 4-year contract. So they're getting these guys past their sell-by date. They're getting them most of them on free transfers. That's how they're making it work. But Man City are buying players in their prime. They've no trouble in shedding those older players.
Let me ask you finally, Richard, about Lionel Messi, who has just been serving a suspension for a 2-week suspension from PSG after missing training last week. Now, or the week before last, actually. He missed training because he went to do an ICSA in Saudi Arabia as he's a Saudi tourism ambassador. He was fined and not allowed to train by PSG. He apologised, which is unusual for him. And now he's been offered by the Saudis 400 million euros a season which is twice what Ronaldo is earning from the Saudis. He's only earning 200 million a season. This seems a terrible way for Messi to end his career. A shabby way, awful. What's the latest on Messi?
Yeah, nobody knows. We'll know at the start of June. He's waiting to decide. There's a lot of variables in the balance that offer.
One of them is possibly that he might go back to Barcelona. Is that on?
Oh yeah, that's very much on. That money he's been offered in Saudi Arabia, according to Mundo Deportivo, one of the Barcelona-based papers here on Wednesday, said that succulent offer has been increased to 500 million a year. So the other most likely destination for him is a return to Barca. That would involve a lot of financial engineering. That heavy load his salary. That could weigh it towards an ambassadorial role or institutional role for him over the following 10 or 20 years. They still need to shed. The La Liga here are very strict about their financial fair play regulations. So Barca are trying to shed wages off their salary base. So they need to figure out how to make it work. La Liga are keen for Messi to come back because of the brand power he wields. So they're slightly amenable to finding a solution. Messi himself, he for football reasons, he'd like to return, get out of that circus at Paris Saint-Germain. His family would be very happy to return.
Yeah, he and his family are said to be not very happy in Paris.
Yeah, they definitely prefer Castelldefels, where they live on the beach there outside Barcelona.
Yes.
His kids, 3 sons, have all their friends. They come back regularly to Barcelona at weekends. The press here made a big play about he returned in April with 14 suitcases. So it's been a very complicated saga. Messi has been on the outs with Joan Laporta, the Barca president, because he feels he betrayed him by letting him go 2 summers ago when he wanted to stay. We all remember that tearful press conference he gave where he had to get his wife's handkerchief to tidy up the tears. But he'll come back. It would be, like you rightly say, it would be awful to think he would go to Saudi Arabia. He's not the player he was 10 years ago, but his stats are still really impressive. We saw him in the World Cup in Qatar. He was incredible.
Yes, of course. And that was his lifetime sporting dream, to lead Argentina to win the World Cup final and to equal what the great Maradona had done. That is, win the World Cup with his nation, and that achievement crowns everything in footballing terms in his career. Isn't that right?
Absolutely, and it's interesting. That is another factor at play about whether he goes to Saudi Arabia. He wants to play with Argentina in the Copa America next year. There's also, people are saying he wants to play in the next World Cup. Scaloni, the Argentina boss, wants him to play. Modric will be 38 in September. He had a bad night at the office midweek, but that level of player can still cut it. We've spoken before about other players in other sports.
I'm afraid I've seen him play for PSG quite often this year, Richard, and he doesn't do a lot of running.
No.
He does a lot of walking, but when he does switch on, then he's still a great player, as we saw in the World Cup. It just all seems rather sad. And the state of Spanish football overall, now that this great Real Madrid team is it has effectively imploded, that's not going to make things better, is it?
No, it's not. But in the short term, for Messi, it would be. It's a logical destination for him. Huge excitement here Friday morning after Sevilla's win in the Europa League.
Yes, of course.
So there are green shoots there at the beating Juventus in the semi-final. They're going for their 7th Europa League league title. So, but the English Premier League is just pulling away.
Okay, Richard, it's great to talk to you, although the story of Spanish football going through tough times is a sad one given the contribution it has made and Spain has made to our great game. Thank you very much for joining us. That's Richard Fitzpatrick. Richard lives in Barcelona and keeps us up to date with their scandals, hopefully with the glory someday.